It's Saturday here in Middletown, Rhode Island, and it's Paul Maderos. I'm at the location where George Berkeley lived 300 years ago, 1728 to 1731. Let's take a walk to the famous farmhouse where the clergyman lived. This is Berkeley Avenue, a small, short country road off of that main country road. And here is the location of Whitehall. I'm gonna walk to Whitehall. Whitehall was built in 1727, 1728 by George Berkeley, famous Irish philosopher and clergyman. Right now we're crossing a little river called the Maidford River, currently closed over by overgrowth and maritime brush. About George Berkeley. Born in 1685, attends Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, studies theology, philosophy. While at Trinity, George Berkeley is ordained as a clergyman of the Church of England. He also is very interested in philosophy. He's influenced by a new philosophy particular to Britain, which we today call empiricism. Empiricism is an accompaniment of modern science. According to empiricism, all of our ideas, all of our knowledge is based in our experience rather than from other sources. Like many other British thinkers, George Berkeley championed empiricism, and he was very interested, perhaps as a spiritual person, to debunk what he felt were false claims by scientists. For example, some scientists at that time were studying the physical world, and they began to hypothesize unobservable phenomena such as atomic particles, and they would talk about something we take for granted today, that there's like a thing called matter, of which everything is composed. A tree is, of course, a tree, but it's also composed of atomic particles, which form a stuff we call matter. But George Berkeley was, as an empiricist, felt that matter isn't something that we see in the world, or hear, or feel in the world around us. What we see are trees and cars and trash bins, but we don't see or hear or feel the thing called matter. George Berkeley developed a philosophy which we today call immaterialism, and one of its chief claims is that there's no content to our idea of matter. Also at Trinity College, George Berkeley wrote a series of philosophical dialogues. The title is the Three Dialogues between Hulis and Philonous. And these artful, fun, and complex dialogues also give arguments for immaterialism. Here is the house that George Berkeley built. The dialogues between Philonous and Hulis were read throughout Europe, not only in Britain but in Europe. And Berkeley, even at a young age, in his 20s, was a well-known thinker and philosopher, and his reputation went ahead of him here in the colonies. George Berkeley, as I've mentioned, was already well known for his 3 dialogues and the treatise on the principles of human knowledge. And even in the early 1700s, there were philosophers here in the colonies who came to visit George Berkeley at this location and in Newport to meet this champion of immaterialism. In the 1720s, George Berkeley, like many others, were interested in the New World and the settlement of the New World. There was a commercial scandal at that time, the South Seas scandal, involving shipping interests, and many people were concerned that the settlement of the New World wouldn't be conducted properly, that it would be dominated by commerce. George Berkeley, on his part, hypothesized that a seminary was needed for the colonies to train clergymen for the churches. George Berkeley found sponsors to provide money to found a college in the colonies, and he chose the island of Bermuda as the best location for this college. He came here in 1728 with permission from the Crown, and his plan was to wait here until the necessary monies and resources arrived from Britain. And before his arrival in 1728, in the winter, he commissioned the building of the house behind me here, a red farmhouse, where he planned to live in the interim. A poem called St. Paul's College. From north of Ire, I did conspire to build my town in the glaring fire. For all of west and all of east, the town would stand on land at least. And toward the west, the people would go, furnished in forgiveness with collars of snow. The story has its tragic side. While living here, George Berkeley lost one of his daughters, and after about 2.5 years, news arrived from Britain that the money promised George Berkeley from the Crown would not arrive, that the plan had to be cancelled, and that George Berkeley should come back to England straight away, which he did do. The other part of the story, which everyone learns in any introductory philosophy class, is that George Berkeley, when he began to pack his things to return to England, he had to do something with the large library which he had brought over for the beginning of this college in Bermuda. There was something like 20,000 books of all kinds necessary for a good college. These books George Berkeley divided in half. One portion went to Yale in Connecticut to our west, and the other portion went to Harvard to our north. So in important ways, George Berkeley is one of the first philosophers in New England, and also a contributing founder to our famous universities today. Here's a poem from the book called Whitehall Poems, written here by myself. over 10 years ago. Primaries and secondaries. Our old John Locke, who knew no greater friend than Mr. Newton Apple, whose works so nicely lend much compliments and nods to John's old artful blend. Both John and Isaac would agree that particles and matter do in the universe collide to make the planets fatter, that measurements and principles provide the frame that guides the mind, that qualities deemed relative are unsightly and declined. So, who is George Berkeley to wake this goodly rest, to propose that all sure primaries are secondaries at best? Facing west on a Saturday. Way across there is the school where I teach, Salve Regina University in Newport. That's the famous mansions of Newport there. And then far across now is portions of Middletown, and there's Purgatory Chasm in the distance. And that is a school called St. George's, a private school. And then the countryside of Middletown, where George Berkeley lived. At that time it was Newport. This is the location known as Purgatory Chasm, a place where George Berkeley would have visited 300 years ago. Purgatory Chasm is like a mountaintop right beside the Atlantic Ocean. The rock formation is similar to rocks you'll see in the countryside here in Rhode Island. It also reminds me of the top of Mount Monadnock, hundreds of miles away to the north. The title of the poem is Purgatory Chasm. Look, what tumult, what bustling rock. Our steps for a ladder, all pressed and in tatters, so slips never matter. That fearsome old gorge is shade at last for fishermen fast who live by the cast. The dense creeping brush of juniper and tea, of which the birds sing, an aviary for free, an aviary for free. No matter this matter, then falsely you speak, for every idea is never so bleak. This is a poem from the book Whitehall Poems. Abstract ideas. Some words are thick, while others are empty, standing as pointers for ideas who are plenty. But should ever the empty gain current and acquire the trappings of portent, proportion, and mire, then know by this sign, the scourge of our times, abstraction brings falsehood, abstraction maligns the language of persons who speak and opine.